On a bitter Christmas day in 1989, the crackle of gunfire at a military base in Târgoviște marked a brutal end. As Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu fell before a firing squad, their 24-year reign of terror collapsed in a televised spectacle for the entire world to see. But while the dictator and his wife met their grim fate, a more private question lingered in the chaos of revolution. What had become of their children? The lives of Valentin, Zoia, and Nicu, once defined by absolute privilege, were now shrouded in uncertainty, their fates tied to the most hated surname in the country. Their story is inseparable from the state their parents forged. When Nicolae Ceaușescu took power in 1965, he first cultivated the image of a reformer, a communist leader charting an independent course. Romania opened relations with West Germany and boldly condemned the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, offering a brief, tantalizing glimpse of a different future within the Eastern Bloc. That promise, however, quickly evaporated. By the 1970s, Ceaușescu had constructed a cult of personality so vast it rivaled that of North Korea. His portrait was an inescapable presence, his titles, the genius of the Carpathians, the conductor, chanted by a captive nation. His wife, Elena, with little formal education, was reimagined as a scientist of global renown, a fiction propped up by the state. Behind this facade of grandeur lay the cold reality of a vast security apparatus. Fear seeped into the fabric of daily life, turning neighbors into informants and children into spies against their own parents. Any whisper of dissent was systematically and ruthlessly crushed. By the 1980s, this tyranny was matched only by the desperate poverty it created. Determined to erase Romania's foreign debt, Ceaușescu exported nearly all the nation's food and industrial output. He left his people to endure crippling shortages, darkened cities, and unheated homes in the depths of winter, all while his own family dwelled in a world of unimaginable opulence. Living within this gilded fortress, the Ceaușescu children were shaped by a distorted reality, one that could not possibly prepare them for the storm that was about to break. In the silent, opulent halls of the presidential palace, the future of the dynasty was an unspoken question. While Nicolae Ceaușescu never publicly designated an heir, he failed to prepare his children for the day their gilded world would inevitably shatter. His three children, Valentin, Zoia, and Nicu, each lived a life of immense privilege, yet their paths diverged in the long shadow cast by their father. The eldest, Valentin, born in 1948, seemed the most determined to escape that shadow. He pursued a doctorate in nuclear physics, choosing the sterile precision of science over the murky currents of politics. Yet, his life remained entangled with the regime. A first marriage to the daughter of another high-ranking official wove together two of Romania's most powerful communist families. Though he cultivated a low profile, he still held a seat on the Central Committee and, as chairman of the Football Federation, presided over the Army's club, Steaua București, during its celebrated 1986 European Championship victory. To the public, he was the most normal Ceaușescu, a man who at least tried to forge his own way. His sister Zoia also sought refuge in the world of academia. Born a year after Valentin, she earned a doctorate in mathematics, carving out a space for herself at the Romanian Academy. She developed a reputation for a fiercely independent streak, and whispers suggested she would privately criticize her parents' increasingly detached and lavish lifestyle. Her relationship with her mother, Elena, was said to be especially fraught with tension. But even as she maintained a quieter profile, married to an engineer, Zoia could not escape the name she carried or the luxuries it afforded, comforts that were an impossible dream for ordinary Romanians suffering through the brutal austerity of the 1980s. But where his siblings sought distance, the youngest, Nicu, craved proximity to power. Born in 1951, he was widely seen as Nicolae's favorite and the heir apparent. Nicu embraced politics with a chilling enthusiasm, climbing the ranks from the Communist Youth Union to the critical post of party secretary in Sibiu County. His ascent was shadowed by a dark reputation. Stories of drunken car accidents, violent assaults, and the flagrant abuse of power circulated in hushed tones across the country. One infamous rumor told of a young woman struck and killed by his car, an incident for which he faced no consequences. By the late 1980s, Nicu's ruthless personality and unwavering loyalty made him the logical successor to his father's throne. While the children lived insulated by their status, the tremors of change were beginning to shake the Eastern Bloc. Their gilded cage, once a fortress of privilege, was about to become a trap. As winter descended on Bucharest, judgment was coming for the entire family. In the biting cold of December, the last vestiges of an old order were crumbling. As communist regimes fell one by one across Eastern Europe, a chill wind of change finally reached the borders of Romania, where the end would be swift and violent. The first spark ignited in Timișoara, where a protest against the eviction of a local pastor, Laszlo Tokes, quickly spiraled into a city-wide revolt. Returning from Iran, Nicu Ceaușescu responded with brute force, leaving hundreds dead in the streets. On the 21st of December, he staged a mass rally in Bucharest, a familiar theater of power meant to reassert his control. But the crowd, for the first time, turned against him. Live on national television, the nation watched as the carefully orchestrated chants were drowned out by a chorus of boos and jeers. The conductor stood bewildered, his authority shattering in real time. Within hours, Bucharest had exploded into open revolution. As protesters stormed government buildings, Ceaușescu and his wife Elena fled by helicopter from the roof of the Central Committee building, abandoning their capital to the fury below. Their escape was brief. Captured near Târgoviște, the couple faced a makeshift military tribunal on Christmas Day. In a trial that lasted less than an hour, they were charged with genocide and the destruction of the national economy. The verdict was never in doubt. Minutes later, a firing squad carried out the sentence. That evening, the gruesome images of their bodies confirmed for all to see that the Ceaușescu era was over. But as the nation celebrated, a new question lingered in the air. What would become of their children? In the chaotic aftermath of the execution, the children of the fallen dictator faced their own judgment. On Christmas Day, 1989, the same day his parents were put to death, Valentin Ceaușescu was taken into custody. He offered no resistance, a quiet figure swallowed by the storm. Though he held no official power, his very name was now a brand, a mark that drew the eye of revolutionary forces. Valentin was delivered to the Rojava military prison in Bucharest, where the next year of his life would unfold in a cold cell. His arrest was a measure of caution, an act born from the new government's deep uncertainty. His sister Zoya met a similar fate that same day. When the soldiers arrived, she reportedly showed no surprise, as if she had been waiting for this moment. A mathematician with no hand in her parents' regime, she was imprisoned with a quiet dignity that witnesses would later recall. But for their younger brother, Nicu, there would be no quiet surrender. His experience was to be dramatically different. As the party secretary of Sibiu County, he had first tried to crush the local protests with military force. When the uprising overwhelmed him, he fled, only to be captured by revolutionary forces on December 22nd. Nicu's arrest was not a quiet detention. It was a raw, televised spectacle of fallen power. Footage from the time shows him being paraded before furious crowds, his face visibly battered, the Revolutionary Guards barely restraining the mob's thirst for vengeance. Unlike his siblings, whose detentions were largely symbolic, the case against Nicu was built on a foundation of specific charges. He was the official who had ordered troops to fire on demonstrators, and in the turbulent months ahead, that order would demand a heavy price. In the raw aftermath of revolution, a nation hungry for justice turned its gaze upon the dictator's heirs. The new government, a fragile coalition of former communists calling themselves the National Salvation Front, began the work of settling accounts, and the Ceaușescu children were brought before the courts. For the eldest, Valentin, and his sister Zoia, the cases against them quickly proved thin. Prosecutors struggled to find crimes that went beyond the simple fact of their name. Valentin was accused of undermining the national economy, a charge stemming not from a government post, but from his leadership of the Football Federation, where he allegedly funneled funds to a favored team. Zoia, a mathematician, faced similarly weak economic charges, forcing the state to focus instead on her privileged lifestyle. After nearly a year spent in the cold reality of detention, both Valentin and Zoia were acquitted and released in late 1990. The courts found no sufficient evidence of prosecutable offenses, only the shadow of their family's power. But for their younger brother, the path to judgment would be far more severe. Nicu's trial was different. As the party's secretary in Sibiu, his hands were not clean. He had given direct orders to security forces during the uprising, resulting in the deaths of 89 protesters. Charged with genocide, the same crime that condemned his father, Nicu faced his accusers with an unrepentant glare. He showed no remorse, casting himself as a loyal official caught in a crisis, an attitude that only alienated a public desperate for contrition. In 1990, the court found him guilty not of genocide, but of aggravated murder, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. He was the highest-ranking official convicted for the violence of the revolution, yet for many Romanians, it was not nearly enough. With their parents dead and their family name now a synonym for tyranny, the surviving Ceaușescu children were left to build new lives from the ruins of the old, forever bound to a legacy they could never escape. The name Ceaușescu was now a brand of infamy, a heavy inheritance for those left to carry it. For the children of the fallen dictator, the question of their place in a new Romania would define the rest of their lives. Of the three, Valentin Ceaușescu proved the most adept at navigating the ruins of his former life. Released in late 1990, he retreated into the familiar world of scientific work, though far from his previous prominence. He understood that his surname would forever be a mark upon him, and so he cultivated a deliberate and quiet existence. In 1992, he began a protracted legal war to reclaim personal effects confiscated from his parents, a battle for the fragments of a shattered past. This struggle would span decades, a testament to his quiet persistence. Only in 2014 did the courts finally grant him ownership of certain items, like books and personal mementos. But perhaps his most profound act was the fight for his parents' remains. For years, the graves of Nicolae and Elena lay under false names in ₓecution cemetery, their final resting place unmarked and unknown. Valentin's efforts finally succeeded in 2010, when proper gravestones were at last permitted. He never left Romania, choosing instead to live out his days in Bucharest as a quiet witness to his family's staggering rise and its brutal fall. Zoia's life after prison was a far shorter, more tragic story. Upon her release in 1990, she tried to resume her career in mathematics, but the doors of opportunity were now closed to her. Like Valentin, she joined the legal fight for family possessions, but the execution of her parents and the violent erasure of her entire world had left wounds that festered in private. Friends would later speak of a persistent melancholy that settled over her, a deep shadow from which she could never escape. Then, in 1998, Romanian media delivered the shocking news. At just 49 years old, Zoia Ceaușescu was dead from lung cancer. Some speculated that the immense stress of the revolution and her imprisonment had hastened her end, a life cut short by the weight of history itself. She left behind a single book of mathematical papers and a handful of interviews, another chapter of the Ceaușescu story quietly closed. Nicu's path was one of defiance and rapid self-destruction. Initially sentenced to 20 years, he was granted a medical release in 1992 after only 4. Imprisonment had revealed a diagnosis of cirrhosis, the grim result of a life of well-documented excess. Once free, his health spiraled downward, yet, unlike his siblings, he showed no interest in rebuilding a quiet life. Instead, he gave inflammatory interviews, defending his father's regime with a bitterness that only deepened his isolation. Just 4 years after his release, in November of 1996, Nicu Ceaușescu died in a Vienna hospital at the age of 45. He had traveled to Austria seeking specialized treatment that was unavailable in Romania, but it was far too late. His funeral in Bucharest attracted a small, curious crowd, and he was laid to rest near his parents, whose own graves at the time remained lost to history. The name itself still casts a long shadow, a whisper of a fallen dynasty carried on the winds of change. More than 3 decades after the revolution, the most tangible ghosts of the Ceaușescu regime haunt Romania's courtrooms. The family's vast portfolio of homes, land, and personal treasures seized in the chaos became the subject of persistent legal challenges. Through these protracted battles, Valentin managed to recover fragments of his former life, family photographs, books, and pieces of art. In 2014, a court ordered the state to return a hunting lodge and its surrounding land to him, a decision that ignited a firestorm of public controversy. For many, these properties were not family heirlooms, but ill-gotten gains, symbols of oppression that belonged to the Romanian people. These disputes laid bare the nation's unresolved trauma, a legal limbo created by the absence of laws to properly address the crimes and assets of its communist past. In the court of public opinion, however, a distinction began to emerge. Surveys suggest most Romanians separate the sins of the parents from the lives of their children. Valentin and Zoia are largely remembered as privileged beneficiaries of a brutal system, rather than active participants in its tyranny. Nicu's legacy, however, remains far more contentious. His direct role in the bloody crackdown at Sibiu ensures he is remembered as more than just a dictator's son. Over time, even his memory has softened, particularly for younger generations with no living memory of his actions. Intriguingly, a strange nostalgia has taken root in parts of modern Romania, a sentiment found mostly among older citizens disillusioned by the hardships of post-communist capitalism. This longing is for a perceived stability from Nicolai's early years, and it rarely, if ever, extends to rehabilitating his children. The story of the Ceaușescu children offers a chilling window into the aftermath of absolute power. Unlike so many other deposed leaders who fled with their families into comfortable exile, Nicolae and Elena's execution left their children abandoned, forced to face a revolutionary storm alone. Their divergent fates, Valentin's quiet survival, Zoia's early death, and Nicu's spiral of self-destruction reflect the different ways one can respond to such a catastrophic downfall. Where Nicu clung defiantly to his father's toxic legacy, hastening his own decline, Valentin adapted. He forged a quiet, unassuming path forward in the very country his parents had once terrorized. Today, the passage of time is slowly transforming raw hatred into historical assessment. For Romanians born after 1989, the name Ceaușescu belongs to history, not to lived experience. The children, once groomed to inherit a communist kingdom, were left with only its collapse, a final lesson on the transience of power and the inescapable weight of a family name.